Good morning, everyone. It's super early for y'all. It is what time is it? 5:30 p.m. here. And I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to come in here and talk to y'all for a minute about something that I've been dealing with like my entire life. We're going to talk about something that I think a lot of us deal with as creatives, as career women, entrepreneurs. I'm just trying to get set up here and everything. And it's imposter syndrome. So I wanted to come in here and talk to y'all about it because it's something that we want to talk about this month because this month is all about mindset. So I kind of want to get it off my chest. And I also want to share, I created these little graphics for Instagram Live, so I'm excited about sharing those. And this is also going to be like a live podcast recording as well. So, yeah, it's a lot going on this morning. But I'm going to do like, I really love giving presentations and stuff like that. So that's what I'm going to do this morning. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get my slides ready. Oh, it works. It works perfect, guys. This is awesome. So this morning we're going to talk all about imposter syndrome and why it's going to impact us. So I'm going to hit record on my computer so that I can start recording the podcast episode. And we're just going to have a conversation about it. I'm going to share some of my story. If you have anything you want to share in the chat, go ahead and do that. And let's go. So like I said, today we're talking about something really, really important. And it's called imposter syndrome. And I think that what happens with imposter syndrome is it stops a lot of us in our tracks when we want to do something successful, when we want to push ourselves forward. I know for me, it's a terrible feeling to accomplish something great and then be like, well, did I actually deserve it? Like, did I get it because I was good, or did I get it because I'm a Black woman? Did I get it because this person knows such and such? Or is it just a fluke? Is it going to happen again? Right? Like all these negative thoughts flood our minds. And what happens is, we end up not being able to like enjoy the moment and have that moment and understand that we are the shit, right? So what we're going to talk about today is 4 things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why you have imposter syndrome, right? Like, where does that actually come from, right? And then we're going to talk about how it shows up in your everyday life. So how does imposter syndrome show up and how can you recognize what it is? Then we're going to talk about how to get rid of it. So there's a little trick to this, right? You can't actually get rid of imposter syndrome. It's something that you, at least for me, you kind of have to live with. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we start, I just want to cite the source that I used. So I read this journal article called The Imposter Phenomenon, and it really gave some great insight into, dealing with imposter syndrome and what it was all about and why you struggle with it, and things like that. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that I got this information from a reputable source. I'm not just making this up, although I do agree with most everything that was said in this journal article. This is where I'm getting my information from, right? I'm not like a therapist or anything like that. I like pulled it from a legit resource. All right, so what is actually imposter syndrome? So imposter syndrome is actually the idea, right, that you got where you are today, right? So you got the job that you have, you started the business that you have dope kids, you got that house, you got that nice car, everything that you have, even, being a nice person or having a great partner, a great spouse, whatever, you got all those things by luck, right? They didn't come because you're the shit. They came because you got lucky or somebody looked out for you or whatever. That's why you got it, right? So essentially, imposter syndrome is an inability to internalize your own success. So this happens a lot of times when, things go really well and maybe we'll talk about how it shows up or who gets it. But it shows up a lot of times when you're in an environment that's different and you're kind of like, well, I'm not like everybody else. So that's it. I probably didn't get it because of me. I probably got it because, some other factor. And so what happens is it really hinders our ability to push ourselves forward and really progress, right? So that's basically what imposter syndrome is. I'm curious to know if anyone in the chat can relate to this, right? Can you relate to, what imposter syndrome is? All right, so we're going to talk about who gets it. Who suffers from imposter syndrome? I'm raising my hand because I feel like I do. So if Molly says she definitely suffers from imposter syndrome, me too, girl. We're in this together. So who gets imposter syndrome? So perfectionists suffer from imposter syndrome. So those of us who have really high expectations for ourselves and we feel like everything has to be perfect all the time, and we feel like, we need to, when we produce things, they have to be at the highest caliber. It can give us like a sense of anxiety that's like really difficult to manage, like really, really difficult to manage. So that's one of the things that I think happens when you have imposter syndrome and you're a perfectionist, right? Like you have this anxiety. There's experts. So experts are, those of us who have a need to know everything, or like some of us who want to teach about finances or about, the things that we're going through, right? How to deal with trauma. And maybe we're not, PhD students, or even if you are a PhD student, you have this sense of like, well, I can't share the information until I know every single thing about it. Even today, right? Like I was like, I cannot share my experience with imposter syndrome unless I have a valid source, because my experience on its own is not enough, right? So I think that's important to recognize. And then creatives. So those of us who are creative, who are artists, or, create in different ways, it can be a very anxiety-driven career path, because your work, essentially, your validation comes from other people all the time. Like people saying that your work is great, people purchasing your work, you know what I mean? Customers being happy with your creative flow. And that can cause a lot of anxiety, right? Because it's like, am I really good at this? Or like, am I just getting lucky over and over again, right? And then the superwoman. So this is really big in our community. As Black women, we've been raised to believe that, we have to be able to take care of everything and everybody. And that kind of puts a lot of pressure on us. And for Black men as well, right? You're raised to believe that you have to take care of everything in your life, in your community. So because of that, it becomes really difficult to handle a lot of the things going on. And sometimes you can feel that imposter syndrome coming up, right? Like you can feel like, oh, I wasn't able to cook dinner, clean the house, take care of everything going on. Or I wasn't able to do my work at work. I wasn't able to do other people's work as well. Like I wasn't able to become, this super woman today. And now I feel like shit, right? Like I feel like I don't deserve to breathe. I'm being dramatic, but that's kind of the gist of it, right? Molly says, perfectionist, expert, superwoman is me. It's very hindering and mentally exhausting. Yes, I agree 100%. And what I find most exhausting about it is after the fact, right? Like you do something great and you're like, oh my gosh, do I deserve it? And then all of a sudden it's like, it just takes away from the moment. So that's, what happens when we talk about imposter syndrome, right? When we talk about who gets it. All right, so let's continue on. I have some slides coming. I just need to find them because they're all out of order. I don't know what happened. All right, so now we know who gets it. I actually want to give a quick story about a video I watched of Beyonce. I love Beyonce, if you can't tell. But I watched a video about Beyonce, and she talks about how she released the album where she did no promo. I think the album was called Beyonce. And she talks about how everything was a secret, and she wanted to release this album to focus on the music and not focus on all the hoopla around it, all the promo and stuff. And so she released the album, she signed everything off, and it was coming out the next day. And she said she was sitting at the table and she was like so nervous that it was just going to do terrible. She was like, why did I do this? Why did I put it out like this? she was like, I was talking to myself at the table, and she said that her cousin came to her and was like, are you all right, sis? Because, you talking to yourself. And so, and then the next day, obviously, we all know what happened. Like, the album was a hit. Like, everyone loved that album, and it was such a dope marketing strategy because it was such a great surprise. And not only was it an album, but it was a bunch of visuals that went along with it. So it was really well received. And so what I took from that is a couple of things. Number one, if Beyonce suffers from imposter syndrome, we don't have we don't have a choice. Number one. Number two, when it comes to working with your strengths, it can still be a difficult process, right? And also, number three, another thing I learned from it is that when we sit down and think about things from a realistic perspective, we realize that the fears that we have around it are unwarranted, right? Like, sometimes we're just not being realistic about it. So I just thought that story was really, really good in terms of like what it showed. Like, if she can deal with it, if she can have it, then we don't have a choice, right? All right, so now we're going to go into how to actually deal with imposter syndrome. All right, so we're going to talk about the 3 steps for dealing with imposter syndrome. So this is a mix of what I saw in the journal and then my own modification. So what I saw in the journal article that I talked to you about, and then what I feel like is really good advice from my own perspective, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to acknowledge that it's real, right? So you have to acknowledge that sometimes it really is not the fact that you don't know what you're doing and that it is all imposter syndrome, and you have anxiety around the fact that you don't know how to accept a compliment. You don't know how to be successful and internalize that success. That's the first step. And I think it's really important to acknowledge here that it's also important to recognize sometimes it's not imposter syndrome and sometimes you just don't know what you're doing, right? Like, that's just the reality of the situation. Because a lot of times our generation, and I think the generation below us is even worse, but we've gotten a lot of unwarranted praise from our parents and from, a lot of people around us. So sometimes we think we're good at things that we're not. So it's important to acknowledge that, what you're going through is imposter syndrome, or what you're going through is not imposter syndrome. You're just not good at it, right? And so it could be difficult sometimes to tell the difference. But if you're being honest with yourself, it might help. And then the second thing that you could do is, reframe your thoughts around that, right? Based on reality. So think about things from a realistic perspective, right? Like, if you have a project coming up, like let's say you work in finance, right? And you worked on this really dope project because you have years of experience. Or let's say you're a lawyer, right? And you won a really good case because you spent hours and hours researching and putting in the work. Maybe that happened because you're the shit, right? Maybe it happened because you put in the work and you made it happen, right? So think about things from a realistic perspective, right? And for those of us who sometimes imposter syndrome just stops us in our tracks, it might be helpful to think about the outcome, right? So let's say you are a lawyer and you have this big case, right? And you put hours and hours and hours in, and you're like, oh my goodness, like, is this going to go well? Is it not going to go well? Right? Think about it from a realistic perspective. Like, I put in the time, I put in the effort. I've won my cases before. I've done a case like this before. Chances are that, I will win, right? Or even if you are, a blogger or a YouTuber or a podcaster, right? Oh my goodness, people aren't going to listen to this episode. Did people listen to your previous episodes, right? Do your friends and family tell you how good you are at speaking, at sharing information, at creating content? If that's the case, then people probably will listen, right? But if you get into a situation where you haven't put the work in, you really don't have any experience or background in it, and you try to come up with something new, maybe it's not imposter syndrome. Maybe you just don't know what you're doing, right? So reframe your thoughts and look at the actual reality around the situation, just to kind of put yourself in a position where you're really calling out the ludicrousness behind why you're so afraid, right? It could be that, you are afraid of things that are never going to happen, and realistically it probably won't. And then pull on your past, right? Have you been successful at this thing before? Yes. Well, the likelihood of you being successful again is probably high, right? So that's really important to do. And then the last thing is to talk to your support network, right? So those of us who have a support network, if you don't, I definitely recommend you finding a community of people that are going to help you to progress. Because if you are trying to be successful in any area of your life, but especially entrepreneurship, business, the creative world, whatever, you're going to need a group of people that have your back, and not just from like a, technical perspective or helping you learn, but also helping to keep you on track when it comes to things like this, right? But talk to your support network and ask them like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Like, I feel like I'm worried about putting this up because I feel like no one's gonna like it. Or I'm worried about this project because I feel like it's not gonna be well received. And they can give you a more realistic approach or a more realistic idea of what they see, right? They can help to kind of put us in a better zone, or say, what you're saying is ridiculous because you're excellent at it, right? And they can help calm us down a little bit. But also they can help keep it real and be like, well, what I would do is maybe you could change a couple of things, and I think that will make it really, really strong, right? So they kind of help to help us to manage, the imposter syndrome that we have going on. So I think that is really, really important. Just checking my notes, because these are all out of order, guys. Yeah, I think that's it, guys. I think that is it. So these are the 3 things that I would do, right? So the first thing is to acknowledge that it's real. The second thing is to reframe your thoughts around reality, right? Like, is this really a situation that I need to be worried about? Is this something that I'm actually going through? And the third thing is to talk to your support network and get a realistic view of what's happening, because more than likely it's us being stuck in our own head, right? And then the last thing I want to leave y'all with is this, right? Unfortunately, imposter syndrome may never go away. It really may never go away, unfortunately. And so we have to be very careful about when we talk about getting rid of it, or when we allow it to let it stop us from doing things. Because what happens is, if we wait till the imposter syndrome goes away, we could be waiting forever, and we could miss out on so many different opportunities. And I think that one thing to recognize is, like, a lot of people go through this. They have imposter syndrome, but they keep going, right? And that's the trick. The trick is not to let it keep you down. And I know it sounds kind of like fluffy, like, don't let it keep you down, sis, but it's the reality of the situation. The more that you allow it to stop you from moving forward, and the more that you allow it to stop you from pushing yourself forward, the longer it's going to take you to reach your destination, because this may never go away. So imagine waiting your entire life for imposter syndrome to go away, and then you miss out on so many opportunities to start that business, to create that partnership, to create your blog, or create your podcast, right? You're going to be waiting. And the people that push through, like myself, because I suffer from this a lot. Like, I'm suffering from it right now. Which is so ironic. The people that push through are the ones that, actually are able to achieve what they have, because they push through, right? So that's it. I'm going to call this, let's say, morning coffee or something like this. I'm going to try and do this a lot more. Maybe I'll do it later in the morning. I just kind of needed to get the video done, so it had to be done today. But if you are interested in hearing more about imposter syndrome, or more about, mindset when it comes to being a creative or being an entrepreneur, make sure you're following us at Gold Standard. We're hopefully going to be doing a lot more things like these, going live and things like that. And you'll also be able to catch this probably on our Instagram live. But yeah, make sure you are on our email list so you can get notifications of when we have dope content coming out like this and things like that. And also share your thoughts around this, right? Share how you feel about imposter syndrome, and what it means to you, right? Because we really, really love to hear. All right, everyone, have a great morning and enjoy your day.